our final speaker. And just a reminder that while Karen is speaking, that's your last opportunity essentially to get some questions in. Following her talk, John Mark is going to then do his best to group together those questions and bring them into themes which he'll put to the panel. So Karen, as I say, is our final speaker, and as I mentioned at the very outset, Karen is 20 years now in her role as CEO of One Family. She represents the organisation on the National Advisory Council on Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures, which is the National Children and Young People Strategy. She also chairs their subcommittee on child poverty. She sits on the board of the Courts Service, representing court users, and is the incoming chair of their Family Law Development Committee. So over to you, Karen.
Thanks for that, Sinead. So One Family is primarily a service providing organisation, although we have done some research and policy work in the area of family law over the years. We did research a number of years ago around the need for child contact centres in Ireland. We ran pilots on those, and then we had an independent evaluation that actually Stephanie Holt undertook for us. We have done Ireland's first shared parenting survey, and we have a lot of policy work on our website around different aspects of family law. We know it's a huge issue for the families that we work with, and we are doing our best to try and highlight some of the issues, and I suppose through this opportunity that we have in family law to gather voices and to look at, this year anyway, the needs of children. But a lot of what I would be saying is based on the experience of the actual parents and children whom we work with day in and day out in the organisation. So I'm going to start with kind of saying one of the issues we're concerned about is that we need clarity on the vision and the purpose of this reform. And I think this is echoed in the Ombudsman for Children Office submission as well, because who is the reform for? Because we've got a very robust general scheme for the legislation, but we don't have a scheme about the services that are needed, and we don't know who's going to develop them, fund them, run them. And maybe we don't need to know all of that yet, but we do need a central vision of the entire process. And in our view, that should be about child safety and the best interest of the child, because otherwise when we run into difficult decisions along the way, or there are various stakeholders with competing interests, it'll be hard to determine what to do unless we can keep going back to saying, well, actually, is that about child safety? How do we make the best decision here for children? And I think there's been a lot of there's been really good inputs around the effects of children on different, I suppose, really difficult things that can happen in families and separation. And I just want to mention one of the things that's being done in Alberta, Canada. There's a woman, Diana Lowe, I think she's on the webinar actually, and she's been 30 years a family lawyer, and she established the Reforming Family Justice System. And it's a group with judiciary and other stakeholders, and it's well worth looking at their thinking. But what they're doing is they're working to transform the legal system away from adversarial court-based cases on family issues, because research on brain science has clearly shown that that system harms children. It's that black and white, that it contributes to adverse childhood experiences, which many of us who work in family support know all about. And instead of supporting families, the entire system, the culture, legislation, mindsets, causes harm to children and their parents. And to be honest, we think we see the same thing in Ireland. They can see that most issues the separating parents are dealing with, they're not legal at all. They're parenting, they're to do with the relationship and emotions, to do with finances, childcare, and all of those can and should be resolved outside court, and just bring the legal issues into court. They have used the work by the Harvard Center on the Development of the Child, and they have a theory of change model about how to build resilience of children. So you're tipping away from getting into the adverse childhood experiences, and instead you're supporting the child and their parents to do better through skills and services, etc. So an interesting thing, a piece of research was done with the Canadian public and asked them about justice and access to justice. And stakeholders, probably like ourselves on the panel and people in the legal world, talked about things like speedier cases, the right to a lawyer, increased legal aid, simplifying the process, mediation, voice of the child, all really important things. But actually the public talked about the right to a good life, which is really interesting. So now what they're talking about is family wellness in all the family law systems and culture. And that's something that we can do here, because there's no doubt the brain science research is the same. And we have a unique opportunity, as I said earlier, to learn from other jurisdictions and to really get this right. So we need to challenge ourselves. no matter what kind of stakeholder we are, to see, do we want to keep perpetuating? Do we want to keep participating in a system that's proven to be harmful to people? Or do we want to help imagine, design, and innovate an evidence-based system that will help families have that good life that they want? So I'm just wondering if my slides are going up, Noel. I had wanted the first one there a minute ago. If not, let's just go to the second one. Maybe I just have 2 slides. Yeah, so sorry, that one, as you can see, are just some quotes. One is from a mother who participated in our shared parenting survey a number of years ago. And clearly she's saying there's alternatives to going to court. And then Marion Campbell, who's a well-known family lawyer, also was saying in her experience about agreement, about trying to resolve things outside court. So we'll just move on to the next slide, if that's okay. So when One Family wrote our contribution to the Family Justice Oversight Group consultation, what we were doing was trying to create a system that would work better for children that would be based outside court. And this is what we're calling a family law services model. So very much based on out-of-court family support services, strong assessment processes around the needs of children and the risks to children, and court as and when needed for the sharp end of legal issues. And this is based on our nearly 50 years experience of working and providing specialist family support services to people who are parenting on their own, sharing parenting, and going through separation. So at the bottom in the green, you can see there's this very universal approach about information and support. I think some of this has been echoed by other speakers, but this is just our take on it. And it's interesting when a number of organizations are coming up with similar ways, perhaps, of trying to resolve issues. But what we're seeing here is that there should be universal access to information and support through a website and helpline. So you want information about different pathways available to families, options, information about what a child-centered approach means, because that's what we're advocating here. There should be signposting to appropriate support services. And our own experience of running helplines is that really people may be quite upset and they may need some emotional containment and support on those kinds of calls as well, because ideally that would be the first port of call, is that you go and you get objective information in a supportive way, rather than going straight to court or seeking legal representation if you don't need it. In the pink, you'll see what we're calling Child Impact Assessment Framework, and this is the centerpiece of our model. And we're seeing that this should be completed by all families before they can access court, ideally. Now, there could be emergency cases in relation to domestic abuse or other issues, but even those families, we would see, ideally would still need to participate in this process to ensure the child's safety and best interest. And we're seeing there's 2 levels to this. Stage 1 is a safeguarding assessment, where there'd be a rapid desk-based risk assessment done in relation to the child with information from the family, including the child, from TUSLA, the guards, other organisations as appropriate. So you'd be trying to screen for safety issues. So you'd be screening around high conflict parenting, domestic abuse, child abuse, financial abuse, mental health issues, addiction, parental alienation, whatever might be coming up there. So it's very important, and it's interesting, this is what Jan was talking about, is does the family need a safety pathway, or do they need a cooperative parenting pathway? And then this should be reported to the court. And then the more thorough, longer term piece of assessment, we're calling the Child Impact Assessment. And this should be about identifying what the children need rather than what the parents want. And they could be the same thing, but they're not always the same thing. And the purpose is to develop a child-centered parenting plan that the family can then implement themselves. And this could be done readily. There's parents who will self-organize to do this. And then there's others who may require some interventions or supports. And both of those reports should inform the court if applications are brought. They may or may not need to be, depending on how they get on in this process. This work should be undertaken by professional, trained, supervised staff from an appropriate background, and we're calling them child court liaison officers. They could be called anything, but they should be linked to the courts. They should be able to make reports to court and be trusted by the courts. That's really important to make this work. So in the yellow, we're calling that area Specialist Family Support Services and Alternative Dispute Resolution. And ADR is something that has been strongly mooted around the Family Justice Bill, or the heads of the bill. And I suppose what we're saying is, depending on the issues identified in the assessment, family members may benefit, they may not, from some very specialist supports or general supports. And the kinds of things that could be included there could be therapeutic services for children and parents, parenting services that are skills-based, supportive, empowering of parents, child-focused, mediation and ADR that's child-inclusive. That should include shuttle mediation as well as joint sessions. Peer support for children, similar to what Rainbow provides, for example. Peer support for parents, child contact centres. There's very few in the country. The pilots were closed down a number of years ago. Domestic violence services, including financial abuse support. And then there could be other specialist services around mental health, addiction, alienating behaviours, child abuse. And these services should be confidential, other than when they don't have to be, and very supportive for the individuals and families. But the outcomes or agreements can then be fed back to the child court liaison officer and to the court as appropriate. And really what you're trying to do here is develop the parenting plan and assist the families to be able to implement that particular plan that they have devised for their family. So in a way, we already provide a scaled down version of these services in One Family through our Separating Well for Children service, but this needs to be systematically developed and resourced right throughout the country for all families who need it. You can then see that there should be fewer cases going to court, or people just going to court to ratify agreements. There should be ideally less demand for courts, perhaps less demand for legal practitioners. There should be fewer adversarial cases and more demand for the family support services. And the court decisions, they shouldn't always be on the family to have to go back to court if those decisions are broken. Ideally, the child court liaison officer can have a role in ensuring that things are working for children, so that the onus is not always on the family. So this is ambitious. It's probably not perfect, but it's our version of what this could and should be aimed for at this stage. I'm just going to finish by briefly mentioning on Monday, the SRI launched research on child poverty. And they did this using longitudinal data from growing up in Ireland. So they had a massive data set of children and young people over a long period of time. And along with the fact that we know that most one-parent families live in far higher levels of poverty than other families, and most poor children live in one-parent families, what we saw is that families are far more likely to move into consistent poverty when the relationship ends. So that means that the people many of us are working with who are parenting alone, sharing parenting or separating, are already living in or have just plummeted into serious levels of poverty. So this is just another part of the reality that we need to be aware of, so that we can try and provide the correct supports families need, so that the family law is not increasing their stress, but is helping families move forward. So like others have said, we have a wonderful opportunity to really understand the needs of children and their parents, and to design the systems, services and legislations that serve them, so that we do not inflict long-term damage on them, but we support them to have a good life, which is what we all want. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Karen. And really just, I think similar to last year, your messages around where we are as a country, where we are as a jurisdiction, and what we can do to capitalise on the learnings that we see around us is just such an important message to hear, especially at today's event.